Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Two World podcast. I have the honor of starting us off today. And of course, my name is Barney, and I am joined with my fantastic co-host, and he is
Jacob.
And I still think back to how great, if I can say so, last week's episode was talking with Jacob about my time in Japan. And we wanted to kind of give Jacob a chance and talk about some real formative and dive deep into experiences that he has had in his life. Probably all of us thinking back in growing up in our lives, there are certain times in our lives that we think that was probably the most formative or one of the most formative experiences or seasons in our life. And Jacob told me that his time in high school was one of those. And even before he told me where he went to high school, I already knew the name of the high school from Northern Exposure, that it was Wheeling Central Catholic High School, as one of the characters that went to the same high school as Jacob did. But I think, as we all know, Jacob grew up in the faith, the spiritual background he had growing up was Protestant. And so it's interesting. And I'm eager to find out, how was it, Jacob, that you ended up attending that high school?
Thank you, Barney. Well, it's very interesting because I had gone to several schools before Wheeling Central Catholic that were Protestant or non-religious. And I was struggling as a student, and my parents were looking for a place that had a strong academic reputation, but at the same time had a spiritual component that could be positive, other aspect for my experience in high school. And so my dad and mom had heard about Wheeling Central through some friends, and they had done some research. And so they went to meet with the principal, Dr. Joseph Viglietta, and they asked him, Jacob's Protestant, but we're open-minded to fellowship with other Christians, and we have lots of friends who are Catholic. Will it be okay for him to come here? Will that be an issue from the perspective of the school that he's from this Protestant background? And Dr. Viglietta, without missing a beat, said, "I want to show you something." And he pointed up to the banner that was hanging on the wall near him. And in that banner were the words that we are called to serve in the name of Christ. And he says, as you see on the banner, that we believe here that all those who are called to serve in Christ, whether Protestant or Catholic or whomever else, have a place in the school. And so my parents were like, okay, that's what we really needed to hear. And so they came back and they told me, wow, we had a really good meeting, and we think you should meet Dr. Viglietta also. And so I did, and he was very gracious and welcoming. And it was such a different experience because, like I said, I had struggled in school, and I remember feeling just disheartened about switching schools again and feeling like, oh, am I ever going to find a place that feels right for me? And I had gone to a private school years before Central. And when my parents took me to meet the principal asked me a question at this other school. And he said, Jacob, what kind of grades are you getting? And I said, I'm getting C's. And he's like, well, what do you think you should be getting? And I said, well, maybe a B. And he said, well, here at that school, that was called Wheeling Country Day School. This was earlier on when I went to the school. He said, well, here at Wheeling Country Day School, we believe that all of our students should get A's. And I said, oh, yes. And, didn't say much else. But this time when they took me to meet Dr. Viglietta, he said, so Jacob, what kind of grades are you getting? And I'm like, oh, C's. And he said, well, what do you think you should be getting? And I had learned my lesson from the first principal. So I said, I should be getting A's. And he said, you said it, not me. And it was just 100% what I needed to hear, with that sense of humor and graciousness. And that is like a microcosm of my experience at that school, that there was a lightness and there was a sense of space for for humor and play and enjoyment, as well as academic rigor. They did take academics seriously, but they did so in a way that felt, to me, very healthy. And so, yeah. So anyway, to answer your question, it was through that meeting and through recommendations that my parents really found out about the school. We got connected, and the principal was so gracious. And then we were invited to, apply and enroll, and I did. And um, it was a very different environment, but also exciting for me to go in. I remember my freshman year, there were a lot of new things. And one new thing in particular that I hadn't used before was that they used a prayer book.
Mm-hmm.
And they just about before each individual class would open up to a certain page and say, let's turn to page 56 and we'll say the Angelus Prayer, or let's turn to page 42 and say the prayer for those who have gone before. And I thought it was so interesting because some of the prayers in the book were really rich. Like they had the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And that's the first time I'd been exposed to that prayer. And it was just theologically so deep and rich. Like I remember praying some of these prayers and being moved. And, a lot of the students had used these prayers since they were in elementary school, and it was like second nature for them. But for me, I was like thinking about the prayer, and then some of the teachers would let students pick their prayers. And there's one that I just loved, by John Henry Newman. And I still, there's a phrase in there that I go back to this day. It goes like this. Lord, I know that I may not always, and in fact, please you, but I believe that the desire to please you does please you. And I want to have that desire in all that I do. Oh, and I remember hearing that. I'm like, what a holistic way to live. Like, yeah, we're imperfect and we make mistakes, but we still want to please God with how we live and what we do. And we want to have that desire in all we do. And so that's one of those prayers that stuck with me. So anyway, plugging in there at the school, that was one of the first things. Oh, wow. Using a prayer book before school was this aspect of spirituality that I hadn't been exposed to. And basically, you learn in time that the Catholic tradition, is very liturgical. And there are a lot of written resources that are used in worship and in spirituality. So we learned about that during our school, what in Protestant context would be called chapel. In their context, Mass. We would go to Mass. There was a large cathedral next door, and St. Joseph's Cathedral, which was this large, beautiful, expansive space with a large painting of Jesus, like in the very front of the church, huge, like 30-foot tall, sitting on a throne. And above his head are the designations of these Greek words that I didn't know at the time: hoon, the one who is, this sense of being who is always there. And you see flanked on either side the angels depicted in heavenly worship surrounding him, and the stained glass windows. And it was a visual experience that I had never had before, coming from a Protestant background that emphasized simplicity and maybe, I don't know if you want to call it intimacy, or the sense of closeness. In a simple space, God is close, but that in this cathedral, this large space, it felt like transcendence. God is high and mighty and above, looking down. And so that was a really interesting experience spiritually. And so I think maybe I'll take a little pause here, because I've been talking a long time, and ask, as you hear this, maybe does it connect with any of your experiences before, when you've ventured out of your home tradition into another space where you're like stretched, or you see things differently?
I wasn't going to mention this initially, but this thought had come to my mind when we were thinking about this show, this episode. My first year of university was at Marquette University in
Oh,
Milwaukee.
yes.
So, yes, going to that Jesuit tradition, also a high school, Catholic school, was very different from what I had expected. And I went to mass each Sunday at a very big, also a very big and beautiful cathedral that they had nearby. And I wonder if maybe probably the university setting is just so much more autonomous, and the students are much more freer that maybe I didn't get to experience um, such a drastic change. I think I was kind of on my own path there. But my advisor was a father, and one thing, and he was a good Irish priest, and one thing, however, about the campus, and I think it's even featured in some movies, is this Saint Joan of Arc chapel that they have on campus. It's actually a very, very small building, and just beautiful. And I think that really speaks to how you were saying how imagery and icons and things like that are so emphasized, and how they really can be very moving in a number of ways when you see them worshipfully, and also, like you say, experiencing them for the first time instead of having experienced it for most of your life, and kind of losing that wonder that you see when something is so new to you.
That's a really good point. Yes. Did you experience any cognitive dissonance in the sense that, you know, whether we like it or not, in a lot of ways, our religious communities can carry baggage as they relate to and view other religious communities, maybe based off of their understanding of church history or theology or whatever. Did you find that when you went to Marquette, you were able to experience that with a lot of openness, or did you feel like there was some of that baggage you had to work through from maybe I don't know if you want to say Anabaptist or Protestant critiques of the Catholic tradition?
Um, yeah, thankfully, my parents were actually supportive of me going to Marquette, as opposed to maybe other Catholic schools. Maybe if I were going to choose a school that wasn't a Mennonite school, and the what we had learned about other students there and what we had learned from the meetings, they felt excited or content with that. And I even during orientation, I even spent time volunteering that through a program that the school had set up.
Hmm.
But I think maybe one thing that kind of really maybe even kind of supported in a way what I had my image of kind of the Catholic tradition was, I remember one mass I went to, the priest didn't give the homily, but one of the leaders of the union did, and it wasn't so theologically centered in its message, and that kind of made me think that of maybe some of the differences uh, that maybe people who go to Catholic churches are more familiar with and more used to. I mean, maybe in a way it's related to what's happening in the community and how the church can be part of the community in that way. But it was different from what I had expected at that time.
Oh, sure. Oh, that's interesting though. I'm really glad to hear that you felt like you could enter into that experience with a lot of openness. And yeah, the Jesuit tradition on the whole seems like a pretty good one in terms of some common shared interests with Anabaptist or Mennonite values in terms of justice and service. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so it's interesting to think of some connectors there.
Mm-hmm.
One thing for me in my context that I noticed is as I observed how others worshiped, part of what I was doing was comparing and contrasting my own
Mm-hmm.
experience. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see a lot of people opening Bibles during the message and scrolling through, looking at particular verses, but people were more listening, more of an emphasis on hearing or contemplation. And definitely for some students, and definitely teachers and faculty and staff at the school, a focus on just the act of receiving communion, the centrality of this idea of a sacramental approach to faith, or that experience is so meaningful that it really they experience a deep sense of closeness with Jesus, or intimacy with Jesus through that experience. And it helped me realize that there are different ways of Christ, of embodying Christ-centered worship. And unfortunately, sometimes Christians portray other Christians with like a kind of a simplistic, one-dimensional caricature. And I had heard negative things about the Catholic tradition before going to the school. And we could probably even rehearse them if we think of some of the tropes from like Reformation Protestantism about the emphasis on ritual, or the laity not having much of a role in worship, or things like that. But then as I got there, I started to see a lot of people who cared deeply and loved Jesus, and wanted to live out their faith earnestly. And when I'd hear negative comments then, after starting to come into this environment that were directed against Catholics or the Catholic tradition, I would become defensive on their behalf. And I thought that was unexpected. And I remember my youth group, I was sharing about my Catholic school and some of my experiences, and some of them were like, well, you should be cautious, or don't just, take in every doctrinal thing you're presented with. There are differences, and maybe not all of them are. Well, I'm actually saying it more graciously than they said it. But I remember being like, there are a lot of genuine Christians there that we should not be judging them. And so maybe that was my first foray into what we might call like ecumenism, but living with, or working with, or appreciating Christians across church traditions, or across differences. And I remember trying to explain and advocate for like a more nuanced understanding of Catholics at the time. But I would like to share a picture if I can.
Oh yeah.
Because I think that this aspect of spirituality has stayed with me. And I wanted to share a picture. Can you see anything right now on this screen?
Yeah. I think the sign for your high school.
Yes. Yeah. This is the main entrance. And now I'll shift here. And can you see this slide?
Yeah.
It's so interesting because I really did feel that though my way of expressing faith or worshiping was different, I was invited to participate in a number of things that happened. And in this particular picture, I don't know if you see the banner there on the side, but it says, think and act like Christ.
Oh yeah.
And so I was invited to participate in campus religious activities, even as a Protestant. I remember in one case, there was a teacher in the community, not at the school, but just in the broader community, who taught like catechism courses in the Catholic churches. And he actually selected me among a number of students to go around to local Catholic schools and talk about faith formation and the importance of faith in Christ. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, like that they would include me. I'm not even a part of this tradition. But I share this picture just to say that sometimes when you're an outsider and you are welcomed in, it can mean so much to you. And it just really, they probably didn't realize how much of an impact it was to be invited to participate in these types of things, but it meant a lot to me. And in particular, there's another picture I'd like to share. This actually is taken at St. Joseph's Cathedral. And this was during the baccalaureate service, just as we were preparing to graduate. And I'm playing guitar there with one of the teachers from the school, Lou Volpe. He taught English, but Lou was a mentor figure for me, not only in high school, but later in life. When I was going through my ordination process in the Mennonite church, I reached out to him again. I said, Lou, I know you're not from the Mennonite tradition, but would you be willing to walk alongside me as a spiritual friend or spiritual director, so to speak, in that my preparation for ordination?" And he said yes. And
Wow.
so, but here you can see, once again, space is made to come in and play guitar during Mass, during a service celebration. And you can see surrounding us, the environment is
Mm.
that kind of ornate, beautiful expression of worship, trying to say that the way we worship is also reflects, the beauty of heaven. And so even the adornment, or the way that the space is, the aesthetics of the space also can reflect, the beauty, the search for beauty that God has put in our hearts. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of interesting. But anyway, did you find that, when you were at Marquette, or maybe it wasn't at Marquette, maybe it was more at Goshen, that you found a mentor or somebody who really came alongside you, who, really helped guide you, or spoke meaningfully into where you were in life at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that at Marquette, maybe it was the friends that I was able to make there that really helped me more than anything, because it was an experience that was very different. It's in a fairly big city, and a large campus with a lot of people who are into a number of different activities and hobbies and whatnot. And being able to find friends in my classes that could help me feel like I was belonging and accepted, like you said, and at Marquette. And then, of course, at Goshen, for sure, my some of my professors that I can think of were just so helpful for being around, and felt like even at the times when I didn't have classes, their classes, that there was kind of this connection. Because in that case, it's a small city and a small campus, and you see them every day and say hello, and they notice if you're notice how you're doing right away and mention that. But along these lines, there was a question that came to me that I wanted to ask you, and I know you touched on it a little bit. And this is going to be a long one. So I'm curious. So at the beginning of your story, I thought maybe that you went to your high school, maybe that maybe you even transferred in, but you started as a freshman at that Central Catholic High School. I'm curious, what was kind of maybe not maybe the predicted path? What was your like intended, like people thought which path you would take for your high school? And, would it have been a different public school or a Protestant school? And also kind of thinking, what was your initial image of how the Catholic high school might be when you realized you were going to go there? Because, like you say, most of our images or influences come from what we see on TV or what we hear other people say, and we get this idea of like a strict school with these, the nuns are there and smacking the rulers on desks and things like that, and along those lines, I think maybe most of your friends from your church were going to other schools, and did that affect your friendships with them? And how did you also get support? How did you also feel supported and accepted as well when you were starting so fresh at this new high school?
Those are great questions, Barney. Well, maybe to answer the first part, which is about the trajectory that I
Mm-hmm.
was on, or the expected trajectory, I'll rewind a little bit to elementary school. I went
Mm-hmm.
to the local elementary school that was public in the city where I lived, West Alexander Elementary School. And I really struggled as a student, probably from second grade onward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that my parents were worried that I was going to be labeled as a kind of below average or underachieving student, and then just kind of pushed through the educational system always with that label, and not be challenged to break out of that or to grow. And so I don't know to what extent that could have happened or would have happened had I stayed in the public system. And I know that it's very, very important to say that the quality of education in public systems is also excellent, and there are wonderful opportunities. And so it's possible that it would not have happened. It's just, it was a concern that they had. And I know I had very low self-esteem about my academics. And so they thought maybe the best thing for me to do would be to take me to a completely new school environment where I didn't know anybody and kind of have a fresh start. And so that point, after 5th grade, when I graduated from elementary school, they took me to this, I mentioned it earlier, Wheeling Country Day School for 6th grade, which is a private school that was basically like a prep school for another private school in Wheeling that's well-known, called Lindsley Academy. And they pushed me really hard at Wheeling Country Day School just because they expected so much. Like I told you what the principal said, our school expects every student to get A's here. And, you know, for a student who's behind, to get into an environment where all the other students are kind of ahead, you know, it does change. It shifts your horizons for sure. And I definitely grew a lot that year, but it was very hard. I mean, because you always feel like you're the least performing person in the class. But I had a really tremendous teacher at the time who taught English, Ray Degg, and he was a real encourager through that time. So that helped me. So anyway, I think my trajectory at that point was maybe out of the public system into some, probably next thing would be a private option, and ended up for 7th and 8th grade, they sent me to another Central Christian. This one was Central Christian School in Houston, Pennsylvania. And that was an Assemblies of God school, which was a little bit more similar to the tradition I'd grown up in. I'd grown up in a church called the Vineyard, which was charismatic. And so this was a Pentecostal school, but it was a pretty positive environment. But I still struggled academically, and I didn't really feel like I had found my niche or my rhythm or my sense of success there. I did have some good friendships that developed, but so I think for high school, it was a question mark, because I could have gone to McGuffey, which was a public school in my area, and entered the system, but I still, through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, hadn't found my footing. And so my parents were like, he still might be right back where we were afraid he would be. So they thought, well, maybe we should give another school a try. So I didn't know that it would be Central Catholic. That wasn't even on my radar, but I suppose I thought, I compared it to my other experiences with the other private schools, thinking, oh, it's going to be rigorous before going into it. And then one of my good friends was Catholic. And so I knew a little bit about Catholic spirituality. Like he had mentioned to me about like the rosary before, and you know, I'd gone with him to church once, and so I'd seen the mass at least once, and observed some things. So I thought, okay, the spirituality is probably like that of my friend Joe, and so I had some sense, but I did not know very much. So I just thought it would be rigorous, and that there'd be those elements that I knew. But once I plugged in, like you said, friendships are so important to thrive, and my youth group was a good place to be. They were very kind, but none of the peers from my youth group attended Central Catholic. So I had a neighbor and his sister who attended Central Catholic, and I carpooled with them the first year I went, but then that's the only year that they were there. So I knew somebody going in, but I did feel very much like a fish out of water. And I did struggle my first year there academically. And it really was, I believe, the graciousness and the hospitality and the kindness of a particular family that kind of ushered me in to the community in a deeper way, and helped me kind of find my bearings, and really set me on a new path in terms of how I viewed school and how I viewed my own identity as a student, and how I felt accepted in that community. So if I can share a little bit about them, that is the Presbys family. And I have a few pictures to share, if I may. So if you would just let me know if you see on this slide, do you see inside a cabin right now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So these are some of the family members of the Presbys family, and uh, there's so many things I could say. um, and um, I'll start by saying that just imagine that you're uh, in a new school and you don't know anybody, and then um, you you meet some students who smile at and welcome you and invite
Mhm.
you over to their house. In
Mhm.
this case, invite you to even go on a vacation with them. This is a vacation that they took in Cook's Forest,
Oh, yeah.
and that sense of like, wow, like you want me to come with you? You want me to spend
Oh,
time
yeah.
at your house? And I remember going to their house and sitting around their kitchen. And I wish I had everybody in this picture, but I
Mm.
have three of the five siblings,
Mm.
starting from the person in the center and then going to the right. That's Mike and Mary Beth and Julie. Um, but we would sit around their kitchen and talk what seemed like for hours. And they really would tell me stories about other people in the community or in the school. When I go to school events, they would welcome me. Oh, hey.
Ah.
During my high school years, I went by the name JD because I wanted to like be cool and invent a new
Oh,
identity
yeah.
for myself.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
JD, do you want to sit with us?
Oh,
Or
wow.
do you want, oh, have you met so-and-so?
Mm.
And I'll share another picture here. This is me sitting with Mike and Julie, two
Mhm.
really kind people and friends from the Presbys family. And they were just, what I really appreciate about them were so open. Like it didn't matter to them that I didn't
Yeah.
know anybody else in the community, or that I had a different background, or that I wasn't like a, like a, like a super serious student yet at
Uh-huh.
that point. But they were very open and gracious and kind of just met me where I was. And they themselves were very engaged in academics and
Mhm.
extracurriculars. And I kind of observed them and watched them, how they did things, like
Mhm.
how they talked about their classes and how they studied, and how they balanced their schedules. And I thought, I want to be like that. um,
Mhm.
maybe I could, maybe I could, take my homework more seriously, and maybe I could plug into some of these activities that they're doing, and athletics and drama and foreign language club.
Mhm.
Um, this is another one of the siblings, Stephanie, who was the first person in their family to really reach out to me and was always so gracious. And the interesting thing too, just mentioning Stephanie specifically, is that her peer group were really involved with drama and music, and
Mhm.
they were 2 years ahead of me. And so, as an underclassman, too, when you have older students come alongside you and
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
help you plug into a school play or hang out with them and play music, it just feels so empowering and affirming. And so, um, what I'd like to say is that meeting their family, their Presbys family, I think really had a huge impact on my sense of confidence, my sense of identity, my sense as a student of being serious and finding
Mhm.
something to be passionate about in school, and also the, like I mentioned before, more generally about appreciating brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church who love
Mhm.
Jesus. I really feel like their family truly embodies that love for Jesus and how they treat others and show hospitality. And so I I just am so grateful that I met them, and they really
Yeah.
helped me feel grounded and supported through that school experience. Um, so hopefully that gets at your question, and maybe I could turn the question back to you and
Mhm.
ask, have there been families or individuals who helped usher you through um, times in your life where they really helped you find a sense of confidence, or they were a real support to you? And who might some of those people be that you would like to name?
Yeah. At at Marquette, there was another student who her family was from the Philippines, and Diane, and she and I were both majoring in biochemistry at the time, and so we were always in the same biology classes and chemistry classes and working together. And she, beyond academics, she was really just genuinely interested in who I was as a person too, and curious about my stories of where I grew up. She was from Chicago, so she was from a big city, and hearing about where I grew up was interesting to her. And then for me, I actually had done um, an AP history report on the Philippines. And so me
Oh,
knowing
interesting.
something about her background was very surprising, really surprising for her too. And, we did things like recommend, just novels to each other. And, we would just go to the public library and, they had books on sale and that they were just selling. We would do things like that outside of, academics. Cause I think in her case, she probably felt like a little bit of an outsider, as in she was, didn't look like all the other students. And of course I felt like an outsider as in a number of ways. And that really brought us together in that way. And we're friends even today. We still stay in touch.
Wow,
And
that's
yeah,
wonderful.
and even though I was just there for a year and she stayed, but she graduated in marketing, so
Oh,
she completely changed her direction as well. And then of course at Goshen, yeah, we mentioned Lena from a few episodes ago. And we were often at her house for her mom's spaghetti and fried corn that she made. And their family were just so supportive for all of us. They knew our names, they knew what we were studying, and things like that. And they would ask us about what we were studying, and that was just really great as well. But the friendships were so important as Lena and I and our other friends, we had study tables together in one another's dorm room and things like that, and that was so kind and so helpful. But another question that came to my mind um, is, especially in graduate school, studying education, it's always how can we, as a teacher, like the onus is on the teacher. How can we reach these students? All these students learn in a different way, and they need the material presented in different ways, and don't just try to teach things in all in the same way. Um, but it sounds, and so I was going to ask you that question, but it sounds to me like you already had the tools and were learning well, but it was this family more than your teachers that kind of got you, that made things click. Says it, like you said, it was since the second grade that you maybe had this feeling that school wasn't meaning so much to you, or you were having trouble finding the academic meaning of school. Um, was it was it a different style of teaching at the Central Catholic High School as well, or was it really this wonderful precipice family that just got everything turned in the right direction for you, or was it a combination of both?
oh yes, great question. I think that it was a combination of both. I think that um, there were a lot of good classes, and there was good content and material and good teachers preceding my time at Central Catholic. Um, and I think that the ingredients and the table was set before me,
Mm.
but in a lot of ways, I wasn't personally engaged enough or fully enough. Maybe it was a confidence issue for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It was maybe something to do with interest. Maybe it was a sense of identity. Like I didn't expect myself to be a serious student, so it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like going into whichever class it was before this point, just thinking, oh, like I'll just do what I normally do. I'll try to like get through. And
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe so the change happened to me when I was surrounded by people who, I guess you could say, I viewed me as having capacity to have intellectual conversations and as a peer that wasn't just like a I don't know, lazy student or something, but somebody who could be invited in to share something in the conversation, and then that them believing in me or communicating to me that we see potential in you helped me to start to think differently about what was possible for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to say, though, there were some very unique teachers at Central that I felt engaged the
Mm-hmm.
material and with such a passion. It was contagious, and they were able to communicate clearly, and they used a lot of different, as you say, methods that were like visual, auditory,
Mhm.
haptic, with hands-on.
Mhm.
I want to give a recognition to one of those teachers in particular, who I think helped me find one of my niches in academics, and that's the French teacher I had, Pamela Hartman. So
Mhm.
I'm going to go ahead and share a picture real quickly, and maybe you can just let me know if you can see a picture of some
Oh
students.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The person immediately to my left in the picture, or I guess the way I'm standing in the picture, it
Right.
would be my right. You know what I'm saying? In the
Yeah.
center there, that is Pamela Hartman. She was a
Uh-huh.
French teacher, and she had such a passion for French. And the way that she taught the classes was very immersive. Almost from the beginning in French 1, almost exclusively she would speak to us in French, but it was very accessible. It was
Yeah.
very
Yeah. Yeah.
conversational and invited, a give and a take. And then she would do exercises where she would do vocab, and she had a ball, and she'd sit at the front of the room and throw the ball to different
Mhm.
people, and then we'd throw it back, and we had to respond
Yeah.
to vocabulary definitions.
Yeah.
And she just did a lot with culture, like food, music,
Mhm.
art, and how she presented the materials. So it really captured my imagination. And I would say that I became passionate about languages and learning languages through taking her French classes. And
Yeah.
that it became a huge thing in my life. After that, it was one of my niches. Then when I went to college, I really focused on languages. When I was in seminary,
Mhm.
again, and and I can say that this teacher had a huge impact. So to answer your question, yes, it was the relationships with the Presos family that helped me think differently in a large way about
Mhm.
myself. But then it was also teachers like Pam
Mhm.
Hartman, who presented content with such passion and welcomed me in as a student, because I started her French class as a junior. Most
Oh,
of my peers who had taken French started as a first year
right.
freshman, and so but she welcomed me in as an older student, and even she knew I liked drama at the time, so she let me co-write a play with her. I had this
Wow.
idea for a play, and she said, "Let's write it together." And so we performed it at the Foreign Language Day at Bethany College nearby. And so, like, there are
Wow.
things like that where she made space, and I think that's a huge
Mhm.
thing when a teacher takes interest, as I mentioned before, like Mr. Volpe, letting me
Mhm.
play guitar with him in mass. When they take you under their wing and give you some space to explore your gifts and be creative, it has a huge impact. And and I'll just say, she also took seriously the aspect of experiencing culture. And you can see here that we're
Yeah.
standing by the Louvre.
Yeah.
And so she took
Mhm.
a group of us students in 1997 to a trip through different parts of France. We went through
Oh.
Normandy, and we went
Mm.
through uh, Paris, and we saw Mont Saint Michel and a lot of the large
Ah.
special destinations that tourists like to see. And it was just a very meaningful
Mhm.
time, and it expanded my view of the world. As at this point in my life would have been a junior, and just had a very helpful and kind of intercultural experience there, that then, as you know from our podcast, has continued to be a passion in my
Yeah.
life ever since. So language and culture and having intercultural experiences all were so bolstered by this time with Mrs. Hartman and my other fellow students in this season.
Yeah, it's it's interesting, and it sounds great in your case that when you went to that high school, you could go there with a fresh start. No one aside from your neighbor, no one knew who you were, no one knew about your background, no one knew how you felt about school or about grades, or your
Yes,
outlook.
that's right.
And yeah, and they just welcomed you in, and that you had those really key people in your life who welcomed you in, and the older students and the teachers who you know inadvertently gave you this confidence, and helped you to realize that school and academics really was for you, and accessible and something you could be great at and could express yourself and through as well. Um, in my case, thinking, I went to Marquette wanting to go to some place completely new where
Mm.
I would have a completely fresh start and not know anyone. Um, I think maybe in my case it was too big of a jump. um, but thankfully I ended up in Goshen at the end, in the end anyway. Um, and so I wonder, through all the newness, um, I guess you've kind of talked about it in a little bit here and there. Were there other forms of support that you received to, um, help you through those 4 years? And were you staying? You were traveling there each day, or did you stay? Was the school so far from your home, or?
The school was not very far from my home.
Mm-hmm.
It was about a 25-minute commute.
I see.
Although I did take the bus initially, which was an hour and a half commute. They actually would pick me up at the state line, and I would ride to a local public school, Wheeling Park High School, and then from there catch the second bus over to Central. And so that when I was doing that, basically my first 2 years, when I wasn't carpooling with the neighbors,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that would be pretty long. But then when I started
Yeah,
driving, it was very easy, like a
I
25
see.
minute
I see.
commute.
So yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't a
Yeah.
boarding school or anything like that. So you still had the support of your family at home, but
For sure. Yeah. The
Mhm.
support of my family at home, my parents were always available to listen if I had questions, or if I was concerned or nervous about something, I could share with them, and they would actually pray with me about it,
Mhm.
and listen to me, and which I really appreciated. And I had a very supportive church community. I did mention my youth group before. I know I
Mhm.
talked about maybe having disagreements with them about this or that, but they also were very supportive in a lot of ways
Yeah.
as well, aside from that, um, those things. And yeah, and I feel like very much that, like, I felt God was very close to me in this season and of life.
Mhm.
I mean, I know He's always present with us, but I felt very supported, like from a standpoint of my of faith, feeling closeness of God in this journey. And um, so, yeah, there were a lot of supports, definitely family, um, and at church, and through friends here at the school, and through the president's
Mhm.
family, and teachers who were like mentors to me. It was a very um, nurturing environment and a nurturing period of my life. And that's so nice to have, when not
Oh
everybody
yeah.
has that. And so
Mhm.
I'm grateful for it. And I'm sorry for those sometimes who don't get that type of environment when they're in the formational period of their education. And so, but it was a huge blessing, and it put me in a good place when I was heading off for college to go with confidence and enthusiasm and excitement and expectation. So,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Um, is there anything else that you would like to say on your end in terms of the supports that you had in your journey when you were going through Marquette or Goshen?
Mhm. Yeah, I think for me too. Yeah, it was in the case of Marquette and Goshen, I was away from home, and so it was friends and certain teachers that stick with you, that really were a way for me to feel um, supported, and yeah, it was especially in Goshen's case, it was having have the required convocations that we had to go to, that ended up being a blessing instead of a burden. Of course, every student thinks, "Oh, I don't want to go with this. I want to do this," but we always came away feeling glad that we did, regardless of the topic. Um, I've seen a lot of fun connections with today's story, like you said about travel and about trying new things, and I even thought a little bit about Kai's story when you were telling us about your feelings in school, and the country school that you mentioned, and how you felt like you were behind, and how Kai made the connection. How Kai was saying how, in his schooling experience, everyone's always reaching out to that person to help bring them back up, and it really feels like you maybe had a similar experience, when you were at the Central Catholic High School with that kind of, they didn't realize that they needed to, but you had all these people reaching out to you, caring for you, pulling you up, come up higher with us in a way. And it's just, I can really understand how this was such a formative and impactful time in your life. And I know you mentioned Joe, your friend Joe, and I know that that he really, his life really impacted you in his family as well in
Yes,
so many different ways.
that's very
And
true.
yeah,
And even to like you had mentioned before, keeping contact with some friends, even to this day,
mm-hmm,
that's a friendship that I cherish and continue to enjoy up until this day. And I hope on into the future.
yeah,
And it's the same too with the Presvis family that I mentioned. I can
mm-hmm,
stay in
mm-hmm,
contact, and
yeah,
Mr. Volpe, and
yeah,
so that's always a treasure when you have
yeah.
friendships like that.
Did you have any other photos to share with us, or?
Those were all the main ones.
Uh-huh.
I spent about 45 minutes today going through old photo albums, and I actually have amassed about 45 pictures. And I was like, Jacob, you have to show some restraint. You can't, go overboard here. So I try to just hit some, some
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
key
Mm-hmm.
moments. But yes, yeah, I saw a lot of pictures from um, dramatic performances or sports events that I was kind of surprised at, that I'd kind of forgotten about. But the relationships you form in those extracurricular activities, or the role of coaches, or directors, drama directors. Like I had a really amazing drama director named Bob Athey, who was just very good at communicating with us students and inviting us into um, theater in ways that I think really elevated it beyond what we normally would expect, and had really good coaches. And so, yeah, there's a lot of aspects to school in addition to academics and spiritual life, that in extracurriculars that are very rich and meaningful. So I thought about sharing some of those pictures about, but I thought, oh no, I'll just keep it kind of focused more on the ones I did do. But I
Yeah.
went back recently and drove by the high school with my kids,
Oh.
and it's amazing how similar the outside looks to how I remember
Oh
it.
yeah.
And I mean, there are
Oh
definitely new things, and certain things have been remodeled for sure inside the school and on the grounds of the school. But the main stretch, like that first picture I showed you, it's a Central
yeah. Uh-huh.
Catholic high school, that looks identical. And so as I was driving by, I was telling the kids stories like, oh, I used to walk from this part of the building all the way up that hill to go for gym class, and we would have gym class in that building. They said, you did? You walked all that way by yourself? I'm like, yeah, we did. So it's a joy to be able to share these types of
Yeah.
stories, with family and friends. So thank you for being willing to take time today to hear a little
Oh
bit
yeah.
about my story with Wheeling Central Catholic. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And we also want to give a big thank you to our listeners and to our viewers who were with us today. We really appreciate you, and hope that maybe for you, as you think about your own stories, particularly formative periods in your life, and about the relationships that you had with mentors or friends or family, that you could also experience a sense of encouragement and gratitude that it is to remember those times and those people. And we appreciate also you thinking about our story, and hopefully it's made some connections that resonate with your own experience. And so thank you so much for this time, and we look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye.